we'll go ahead and get started. I see we have a quorum, so we're all look at the agenda for tonight, and if so, if I could have a motion to approve it.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, and a second. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that passes. And then, with respect to the minutes from last week's meeting, that we will, it's also a video minutes of that meeting. So, we just need to approve those as well. So we just need a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
All approved?
Aye.
Any opposed? So let's move right into the recap of the public hearing, which was very nice. I mean, I thought it was really well done.
No, I think we had a great turnout. So as we said, I'm just going to go over really quickly the agenda again, just so you know. So we're going to recap the public hearing. I put 60 minutes down. We don't have a lot for this agenda, so take whatever time you all feel that you want to take on going over the public hearing and the discussion. I do want to talk about additional future topics or research. I've been getting a lot of emails from everyone. So I put that into this presentation so we can have some discussions about, do you want to bring that back again? And how are we going to do that? Or who will we get to come in and speak on that? And then a discussion about what we're going to be doing in 2025. Believe it or not, we're talking next year. It was like 24. So just wanted to bring those things to your attention before we go into the public hearing. I apologize for getting things later to you than I would have liked. Actually, I had to put all this together myself because we didn't have our main administrative person who helps us with all this. He's been out for the last several weeks. So I had to file everything on my own. So as we got comments in through Friday, and then we were off on Monday. So I apologize for just getting things to you today. But here we go. So just thought this was a nice little chart to show you, the pie chart that we received at that time, and I need to update this, 96 written comments when I put this together. We had 26 people in attendance and 21 speakers. So I thought that was kind of interesting that almost everyone who came spoke. A few didn't for whatever reason, don't know why that was. And then this chart just shows what we heard. So the internal ring is from the written comments, and the external ring, which was the speakers. So pretty evenly split for both the written comments for the school adequacy. And I lump these into two categories. Those are the, and I know I'm generalizing this. I know there's a lot more nuances to it, but there were kind of two different sides that were discussed that came as you. I would say, let's say the bride side and the groom side, and we're trying to have a marriage, and so there's going to be a lot of cooperation in this marriage, right? Because we do have two kind of different viewpoints. And so one was lowering or protecting the current school adequacy capacity. Again, I know I'm very much simplifying that concern, but just as a general topic. And so those comments seem to be evenly split with changing the adequate public facilities ordinance to allow more housing and more affordable housing ability. So there's a lot of suggestions thrown out in the public hearing testimony to do that. And we only heard from one written and oral comment on the fire adequacy. There was no other comments regarding that particular comment.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you say split evenly, you're not saying they were comparable numbers. You're just saying it's similar from one to the other?
No, actually they were, when you look at the whole numbers, they were pretty, like when I went to tally the speakers, it seemed to be almost evenly.
Because I did my own count and I took my own notes, and mine does not reflect what you're saying. So, mine reflected that a greater number of people were wanting more density, more building, as opposed to the schools and the EMS.
Well, then we had a lot of other comments come in. So we went over all those comments and we can look at them in real time, but this was generally speaking. And I tallied up what I tallied up. So we can have that discussion. I can give you my spreadsheet. So I kind of lumped them into three distinct categories: housing comments, school comments, and fire and EMS comments. And then when I put together the all of the comments in that PDF that was sent under the meeting information. I organized them that way too. So all the housing comments are first, all the school comments are last, and then the fire EMS comment is the final comment on the page. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of this. I'll come back to the presentation, but I thought it would be helpful if we actually just went through the public hearing comments and testimony. So I didn't know if you just wanted to go down and start reading these, or what your thought process was, moving forward. So I'll leave that up to you.
Any thoughts? I haven't gone through, this list of comments yet. It's a recap largely of what we heard.
Right.
But I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in here and summarize what you think we heard, what you thought the sentiments were, what was compelling, et cetera. Anything?
Yeah, I could start. I've looked at about a third of the comments that you sent, and this is all going into my model later. Seems to be a lot of similar comments throughout, and I'm listening to frequency, just kind of as we heard during, we heard kind of the same similar-ish topics throughout. I felt one, I felt the more emotion of what people felt about capacity and the inefficiency of the process of getting things done. I felt that during listening to the comments. I feel a little of that when I'm reading the comments here, but again, I haven't gone through this entirely, and I'd like to see if I'm hearing more of it's a process issue, or I don't have enough space, because it almost feels like I don't quite understand the outcome of what's being asked. For one part being asked for capacity, another part being asked for.
When you say capacity, are you talking about school capacity?
Yeah.
Okay, because there's school capacity and there's housing capacity.
Yeah, and so that I wasn't hearing as much the housing capacity, and I think that might be actually in the comments based on like the first read through of the piece of a read through of the comments on my end. But
So just reacting to that, I heard more passion on the school capacity side, but I heard nonetheless heard a lot of concern on the housing capacity, so particularly the affordable housing capacity. So I think your pie graph probably summarizes it,
yeah,
as good as anything without digging
Probably
into
does.
details.
I definitely heard the concerns that were very like personally experienced, anecdotal comments about feeling the pinch of deferred maintenance and overcapacity schools. I think that the affordable housing concerns presented also had a lot of passion and heartfelt concerns as well. And I think what happens is there's this perception that they're pitting against each other. And that's a shame, because I think all of us have a lot of shared commendable goals. It's just that we have competing resources in the budget. And I think one thing I'd love to delve into when we get to deliberation time is figuring out, what does it mean to increase housing supply? How does it affect affordable housing? My personal opinion is that market projects, enormous supply of market projects, are not going to make housing more affordable that wasn't affordable to low and middle income previously, and it's not going to get us a whole lot of those units. I would love to see more focus on compromising type things that actually have to do with APFO, with regard to whether or not to do exemptions and where to get actual projects where they're needed. And I think that there can be a lot of productive good that can come in that way. I've talked to some groups after this because I want them to understand that the school people, the school capacity advocates, are not anti-affordable housing. We need to work on some common themes. Thanks.
All right, let's take a little time, imported all the comments from the separated them out by various subdivisions. I had the people here, obviously, this doesn't include the 100+ letters or 90+ letters that we found out about just an hour before this meeting. But looking at them, we have a lot of comments about strengthening APFO, a lot of comments about eliminating or depreciating APFO. Multiple, not only the fire union spoke out, but Howard County Civic Association spoke out on fire policing and other services. I did see a lot of comments in here that, such as APFO is a one-size-fits-all solution. They didn't map to objective APFO criteria that we could raise or change. They were more emotional values, what they felt about APFO as opposed to achieving the goal. And the goal has been from day one to provide adequate public facilities as we grow. And we're looking for technical solutions to get there. It looks like many have very specific asks, and some have specific asks, but are they related to the issue that they're trying to resolve? And it varies. And I'll include all of these and gladly forward them, share them with everybody. But it also, this isn't about how many people showed up. It's about what are they bringing to the conversation? Are they bringing strong, objective, material considerations that we could provide and move forward with? Or more making comments about how they feel about APFO?
Anybody else? One thing that struck me was that the emotionalism and the passion that parents feel when their children are in schools that are overcrowded is palpable. I mean, you can feel it, you can sense it. But it does strike me that there's no remedy for many of those situations in a time frame that the school system and the county through its capital budget process can actually deliver while those children are still in the schools that they're having or they're perceiving that there are problems with. If you have a fourth grader or a third grader in an elementary school that's now overcrowded and they're going down one-way hallways and everybody's breaking their arms and their legs because it's so crowded, there's nothing the county's going to be able to do from a capital budgeting standpoint and a construction standpoint to be able to change that situation. And I don't think it's actually an APFO issue at that point. The school's already crowded. So I'm not sure what the remedy is as we start getting into the process of looking at APFO. A lot of it seems to me to be a timing issue with respect to how the schools and the county at large deals with pressure that's building on schools as capacity is going higher and higher in schools, as opposed to alleviating immediate situations that may be real but may not be fixable in a time frame that parent is going to be able to understand and appreciate the reasons why their third grader is going to finish with a fifth grader that graduates from that school. And in all likelihood, unless we're adding portables, we're not going to take the pressure off the one-way traffic in the hallways. I'm not sure how to deal with that from an APFO perspective, as opposed to kind of, yeah, I'm looking a lot at Dan, I know. But I welcome that discussion from the school standpoint, because it's largely in your capital budgeting process and the county's process of allocating funds, going through a design and construction process. It's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years to release the pressure.
I mean, that's an interesting topic to bring up and have a discussion about, because you're right. I mean, APFO itself is not going to solve overcrowded schools. Building, redistricting, enrollment, balancing, whatever you want to call it, is how that's going to happen. And you're right. When you look at the capital budget, nothing's going to happen in a year or 2 years. Most projects are going to take time to do that. But we got to take a look at specifically with regards to schools, and it can be translated to any of the other tests. What's the purpose of APFO? And I've had the conversation with a lot of people that in an ideal situation, APFO pauses development to give you time to plan and get ready for that development. Unfortunately, with the school system, and I'd say even with the county as a whole, we're not in that ideal situation. But APFO itself and the intent of it is still important. Because while it may not solve that overcrowding, it still needs to be looked at with regards to, in our current present situation, what can happen with APFO to help that or elongate the opportunity to try and address some of the situations.
It's actually a question to that point, do you mind? When it comes to that planning from the school perspective. So you already know what schools are over the threshold of what that adequacy capacity is. So at that point in time, what does the school system do from a programming perspective to alleviate that inadequacy for crowding, perceived crowding, or percentages? Is the goal to get it under that? Like, what's the school system's goal?
So the goal is to have every school at 100% utilization. At this point, what we have as far as defining what the capacity of every school is, it's going to become very, and when you look at it from a strict mathematical standpoint, you can say, and I'm just throwing numbers out, these are not accurate numbers, but say at the elementary level, if throughout the entire school system, we're at a 95% utilization. A lot of people will look at that and say, well, if you just balance enrollment, you'll solve that capacity. But if you have the capacity out in the west, but your need is in the east, you're not going to transport all those kids over out to the west. One, families and communities aren't going to want that. And two, that's an operational budgetary issue. So it becomes very difficult when you start to look at individual areas and what you can try and do. And unfortunately, in the short term, as you pointed out, portables seem to be the optimum thing you can do because you can get them quickly and they're relatively less costly to do. And you can put them out there quicker than actually building capacity. Now you want to try and think of, okay, we know what's overcrowded. How do we address that? That leads you into the capital budget, which again is not a simplistic item either. Capacity is not the only capital need that the school system has. And as you point out, the school system, the county as a whole has limited revenue. So as you're trying to address all the different capital needs, that starts to extend out the actual planning for all the different projects. So it becomes a situation where you're almost trying to play catch my tail. You're just running in circles because you can never actually get there. And that's where items like APFO come in is, okay, how do we slow down your spinning so that maybe you can try and get caught up to catching your tail? I don't know if that answered your question.
Kind of sort of, because I'm thinking of the length of time, and I know that was one of the discussions was to actually extend the length of time that developments are in the bin. But then if nothing's being done to address that, what ends up happening if it's not addressed is then that becomes a regulatory taking. Because you can't build, you've essentially shut down development in that area, and that could be challenging. We would get sued as a jurisdiction for not allowing that development, because there would have to be some mechanism put in place to relieve whatever that situation is.
Well, I'm sorry, Lisa, we're getting a little bit off track of going back to our summary from last week, but this is a topic that I think as a group, we should spend a good bit more time on it so that we understand exactly how your process works in the school system. Like for instance, if you look at the schools chart and you see a school that is for the next 7 years showing as red, closed, it's like, well, what does that mean? Does it mean that we're not able to deal with crowding at that school? And then if it comes up, if a developer has an APFO test, has to pass the schools test, and he looks at it and he says, well, it's a 7-year close. It's a red, it shows red for 7 years. I know it's gonna be closed. I know I have my 4 to 5 year delay. Does the school system just kind of throw up their hands and say, we don't have any way to fix it, so we're just gonna let it stay red and the property owner can just sit and wait? So we're not even gonna deal with it. We're not gonna try to redistrict. We're not gonna include expansion of that school so that we're gonna turn from red back to green. I mean, I don't know how that works, and that is something that I'd like to understand better.
Maybe that would be something for. a
That would be
future
future, I
presentation.
think, because I don't want to get bogged down in it
Well,
today. I think.
they were
Yeah,
looking for
I know that.
suggestions for the future.
Yeah,
presentation,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So I'm sorry, Lisa, I
No,
interrupted
that's
you.
okay.
so.
You didn't interrupt me. Thank you. I was just gonna say that I think that that's really good information to get. And I agree that we should understand how the school system is addressing this, how often they would recommend redistricting, how limited they are with even being able to close those gaps because of distance and all that. That's good info to have that. I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that a lot of people do define APFO as not being able to solve the problem necessarily, but to keep it from getting worse is an aspect that's there because we did review the school enrollment sources, and we did nail down that in that resales category, that's any home over a year old is a resale, whether it was even sold or not. So because of that, we have to understand that the construction sourced new students is much more significant than this low number that's on those charts. And therefore, we know that it would be more if there was an APFO. It would be more crowded if they weren't waiting. And it's true that within that wait, it's not solving the problem. But there is the idea that it would be worse if it weren't for APFO. So there is that thought process. And then, of course, takings, I'll be very quick. A lot of people talk about 4 years as a taking. Other jurisdictions have 7. They're not sued. There's a Supreme Court case out there that defines it differently. So legally, I think that's a whole different ballgame. What we tend to do over the past 10 years I've been working on this in Howard County is they tend to look at what they think is fair, because the legal spectrum is actually pretty long and wide. There is no, it's 4 years as a taking, it's not a legal argument. I'm just saying, so it's something that is considered fair, and I like that. I like doing things that way. I think it makes sense. Like, think about how things are fair on both ends.
Well, it's more than just an issue of fairness. If in fact the schools that are crowded are in the activity centers, if the county has decided that it wants to promote housing development of our final 22,000 units that are left to build without rezoning, then if we're directing our growth desires to areas where the schools are already closed, the question really becomes, are we going to be able to achieve our growth in those desired areas because we're now delaying projects for 4 or 5 years, meaning that those projects are less attractive to develop. So we get less of the housing that we say we want in those activity centers. That I don't know. And that I don't think I don't think we've covered it as a committee in our presentations yet, understood how that interaction works. You know, the schools and the schools that those activity centers are districted to, are they the ones that are closed? Or are they other ones that, if they're the ones that are closed, then we're setting ourselves up for failure to grow in the areas we want to grow because the schools are already closed and every project that gets submitted has a 4 or 5 year wait. And then the development community is like, I'm not waiting 5 years. I can't afford to wait 5 years. I can't carry a project for 5 years. I'm not taking the risk of a 5 year wait. So then it's kind of like, well, then we're not accomplishing what we want to accomplish with Ococo by design. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if we've correlated the understanding where the schools are closed with where we probably have, you
We
probably
have
know.
that information that we can bring to actually.
Right.
And he'll provide is, but I don't know without looking off the top of my head.
Right,
So
right.
we can definitely bring that back as part of the discussion.
So I'd say that's a future topic, but,
Going, hanging off of your point, but going back to the items as well. It sounded like from the persons that gave comments, that APFO was a switch, an on and off. You either engage it or you don't. I get what I need to get and I don't. But the way that we've been talking here, APFO seems like it needs to be more like a knob, where certain tests or certain parts of it are turned on.
it's metered.
Yes. And if there is a facility in APFO to meter test, then it may not need to be 4 years to wait for capacity to be addressed, to wait for building styles to be addressed, road tests to be addressed and readdressed. But right now, or at least the way that it seems like we've been hearing it, APFO's been a switch. It's, I want to do it, switch APFO on, slow it down. It's not been, I want to do it, well, we need to do it. Can we dial in 10%? Dial in 50%? And then there's some kind of thresholds to that. But that's from some of the housing processes that they said, can this be faster? Can this be better? Can we address things in areas that have need that we know that we can address sooner rather than later? APFO being treated like a switch prevents that. Maybe for us, it becomes part of our recommendations becomes, can APFO be kind of a knob, something to
I'm
turn?
with you.
Yeah.
There.
It's a dimmer switch,
Yeah,
no.
but I think some of that is taken into account.
I think so as well. I'm just,
Yeah, go ahead, Brett. Yeah.
So again, I'm working at this from an engineering point of view, working backwards, what's our goal, achieve it. And the goal is to have adequate public facilities wherever is required. To your point you brought up earlier, the speed. I think it's very important to know what you're dealing with here is a multi-year process. It takes a long time for things to go through. There's capital projects, there's changes in administrations and what is a priority and what gets zoned and unzoned. But there are people with children in the school system for close to 20 years between brothers and sisters. This is important to them, whether or not they achieve their ultimate goal in the next 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years. It is irrelevant. We need to make sure that we have adequate capacity for our children, regardless of what year we're in, and especially in future out years. We've been skipping over, I get it, there's a lot of arguments to appreciate APFO, there's a lot of arguments to appreciate APFO, but we are skipping over the various tests that regulate it, right? So we got time weights, which pose a risk to developer. There's a time value of money. And that's one that we have the ability to adjust to achieve our goal. The other one is housing unit allocations, not only how many, but where they're going. And there is a component of APFO, which is supposed to determine geographically where you're steering traffic. And one of the other ones that I'm not hearing, and granted it is in section 19 or 16 subdivision code, is school facilities surcharge. That's that report I asked to be posted for all of you to read what we're doing currently and what we have done. And ideally, that should provide enough resources to deal with the capacity expansion considerations that are causing those red dots. We got a recent increase in that. That was great. But mathematically, it was not sufficient and it is not tested regularly and it is not calculated out properly. And Mr. Lubley here is trying to plan 78 different schools plus additions and all that. He's getting half the amount of revenues as the impact of new growth coming in. That is a significant factor in whether or not there's any of these nice little circles over all these APFO charts. If everything was properly mitigated with proper timing, with the proper time controls, with growth in the appropriate locations, you would have a much lowered pressure for redistricting the short-term solution as opposed to long-term planning, which we should be doing. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Something that resonated with me in the testimony, was when they were discussing the APFO as a uniformly applied aspect, and that there is a one size fits all aspect to some of these measures. And, to your point, an example is, say you have a project that's near a school that's just over the capacity threshold. They wait the same amount of time as a project that's near an overcapacity threshold of an enormous amount, right? And so I think it does make sense to discuss some compromises. When there's a compromise, that means two things change, not just one. What I would really like to discuss in compromises is, maybe if a project is near a less crowded area than a more crowded area, maybe we should have different weights. Maybe we should even have different weights for different kind of units. Some units clearly source more students than other kinds of units. I mean, this is the fairness thing that was in my head, is, how do you apply some compromises that sound fair when you talk them out?
So Lisa, just for clarification, when you talk about weights, are you talking about time?
The time amount of
waiting?
halt.
Okay.
Yeah, the year long, because it's a
So
4-year
time
max. So,
Based on school capacities.
correct,
Like,
but
I'm
it's
at
small enough.
115, I'm at 102. You have a little more leniency at 102 in terms of building there in a
Mhm.
shorter timeframe.
So your recommendation, like, for instance, things maybe
Sliding
between
scale.
100 to 105, let's just say, instead of waiting for 4 years, maybe that time would be 2 years. Is
Well,
what you're
right,
suggesting
like at
for-
right now, the elementary is 105, middle school is 110, high school is 115. So you just grab an example and say, if your high school is 116, then maybe you don't wait as long as if it's 138. Or you wait longer if it's really much more. I mean, we'd have to get into
Fuzzy
some
thresholds.
nitty-gritty of examples.
Fuzzy
to get to
thresholds
the
versus hard thresholds.
Yeah,
We
well,
talked about
it's a
it before.
sliding scale too. One affects the other, there's no doubt about that, but also I thought the two gentlemen that spoke that sounded like they were in their 20s, young professionals, brought up an adequate point that they can't afford to live here. I have a 24-year-old daughter who's a school teacher, and she can't afford to live here without 3 roommates in an Ellicott City townhouse that they rent, but they need to have somewhere to live too, affordable wise, because they have property tax and income tax too. So I think the type of dwelling that we're providing could generate a good deal amount of revenue for this county. And not really, at this time anyway, bring a lot of more school children to that building because they're just not ready to be in that position to have children of school age. So I thought they were that was something totally different. There's 2 gentlemen that spoke relatively close to each other, which just kind of caught me off guard. And it was very interesting, I thought.
So for me, just a clarification, so would you be suggesting something similar to what Lisa said too? So maybe percentage of the adequacy, how close you are to being,
Yeah, so like there's a
Over.
sliding scale.
have a shorter wait time, and then perhaps also for unit differentiation.
Yeah, and that be part of the equation.
Garden versus a high-rise apartment, maybe those two, we know garden apartments.
That's your
probably
numbers
have a
usually.
more
drive.
of a-
Yeah.
More of a,
Yeah.
higher student yield than a high-rise.
100%.
Right, and then especially this high-rise, maybe more studio and 1, maybe 2 bedroom.
And that's what he said, yeah, 1, 2-bedroom apartment studios. And I was like, oh, that makes a little more sense to me.
Mhm.
So the type of dwelling and then the time frame in order to be able to develop
Mhm.
in regards to the capacity of the schools in that particular geographic area.
But my suggestion is not to just lower certain things. I mean, if we're going to talk about doing a compromise and what's fair, you have to have some go up and some go down. So I just want to say that.
So then what would be a suggestion of going up then? Like, what would you?
I think that some of the really high capacity areas that are like really higher than the percentage is, it should be longer than 4 years. And I know we'll get into a discussion about takings, and I have my opinions there and the legal slates there, but I think it should be more on the really, really most crowded areas we have.
And what would be?
And
like
then the
examples
least,
on those
lesser
crowded?
crowded,
So
should be
what are
less.
some of our highest percentages? Do you know off the top of your head?
Running Woods, right now it's over 120, and basically we'd be saying no more development in Columbia. or
That part.
Really?
Wildly, Gary.
Jeremy's trying to chip in here.
Yeah, this is a really, really good discussion. I like how we started the conversation by saying we shouldn't be trying to discuss this by pitting housing versus schools and like counting, oh, this is how many people testified in the school bin, this is how many people testified in the housing bin. I think like us as a committee should be listening to all the testimony and trying to figure out, well, how do we achieve everybody's goals? And the one commonality that I heard throughout the testimony last week was, we need to meet our obligations for our schools' deferred maintenance and to add capacity into the future. I don't think anyone was against those concepts. The housing, the Affordable Housing Coalition, even had suggestions on raising revenue that could be used for those tasks. And so, I feel like in an ideal world, the question is, well, the school system has all this deferred revenue. If you look at the 10-year long-range master plan, there's like over $1 billion of capital planning that the school wants to build over the next 10 years to meet deferred maintenance and added capacity, and the revenue that's going for that is, if it continues its current trends, would be very much falling short to meet that long-range plan spend. So like when I think about this, it's a revenue problem. It's not a time problem. Like if we're trying to figure out how we're going to meet the school capacity goals and be able to add housing and add affordable housing, we need to figure out how to build schools. And so I don't really feel like APFO could provide time. It could provide 4 years. It could be adjusted, but I don't think it's a time problem. I think it's a money problem. And so I think of it from the standpoint, I like where we're going right now with should we have some type of differentiation of wait time by region based on school overcrowding in those schools? And I think, could you maybe take that concept and apply it to a revenue framework? Could you adjust revenue so there's higher school impact fees for developers if they want to build in an area that has overcrowded schools?
Yeah.
So my understanding of the way it is right now is it already, the time it takes does depend on the kind of housing you're building. So if you're building 55 plus and it doesn't impact the schools, that's a different test, if you will, than if you're building.
You don't have to worry about the school's tests.
Right, but there's other things you have to
Yeah,
worry
the
about, like
allocation.
EMS and all that stuff.
So no, not necessarily. So just allocation
Mhm.
and roads, which is kind of more of a mitigation.
Right,
So if the roads are inadequate, then as the developer,
right.
you would have to build the roads to adequacy standards.
So-
So don't have to worry about the school
Right,
components.
so there is already something depending on the type of housing that you're
Just
building.
restricted.
And
Yeah.
I also, from the gentleman who came, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he also talked about the size of the house and how many pupils and all that stuff. Also, I thought was taken into consideration when they thought about these, time frame and all that. And what I will say as a real estate agent, we here in Howard County, we have the highest transfer and recordation charges of anybody in the state of Maryland. And the thought of adding transfer tax and adding fees, because if you add a fee to the builder, who pays it? The person who buys the property. So you can't, because the builder's not going to absorb that cost. It immediately gets passed on to the person who buys the property. So in my opinion, you can't say we need affordable housing and in the same breath say, and we need to raise taxes only on the people who are buying. And I think it was the fireman gentleman, or maybe I think it was the guy who came from the fireman. He said, we're focusing on charging the new people who are just coming here, charging them to move to Howard County and not taking into account the people who already live here. So I think that I understand it's a revenue problem, and there's a revenue problem in the state of Maryland. Part of the reason why the revenue is down is because building and construction has been down. So buying and selling of houses, 300 houses sold in Howard County last month. There's your transfer and recordation charges. So part of the reason why there isn't a lot of revenue is because the housing inventory is so low, nothing is selling. So maybe if you increase the inventory, you get more transfer tax. And just by the fact of, the numbers, you're gonna get more money instead of saying, okay, let's add another, because we just did a transfer tax increase 2 years ago of 1/4 of a point. So I think when I think about all this, I feel like there is a solution, but I feel like it's gonna take a lot of different things to get to that. And it can't just be schools, and it can't just be build new housing. But I do think we need more dense housing, which will make it more affordable, which will increase the taxes because more people will buy properties, and you will naturally have more transfer taxes, which could potentially open up other houses for people who've been living there for a long time that maybe a new family wants to buy, because there's a senior who's been there for 40 years. They want to stay in Howard County, but they don't want that 3,000 square foot house anymore. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
I'd like to clarify what we're talking about when we say fees. Because one thing that we can factually look at very easily, and I sent some charts to Lisa and Linda and Todd from 17 to 24 on the actual impact fees of all the jurisdictions, including Howard. And for literally decades, Howard had 20 times lower fees than, say, Montgomery County and other growing counties. 20 times lower. Ours were like 2,000, theirs were like 40-some thousand. I mean, and for a long time, right? So I think that is a definite reason, or a part of the reason why we're in this financial quagmire. And the reason why Montgomery County has so much more money for their infrastructure than we ever will. And even now, Montgomery County is 56,000 a unit. And we did have a very large increase in these fees recently. It was implemented over several years, so it's recently been fully implemented. And it was a pretty big increase. It went from $2 and something to like $9 and something.
Down on a quarter.
Absolutely big
It's
change.
quadruple.
But even with that, FYI, we're about 1/3 of Montgomery County. So all I'm saying is that we're not the highest, we're nowhere near the highest, and we could never charge developers enough to get out of this hole. No one would build anything. You're right. But I also think it's unfair to lower them or to suggest we lower them because of how long we waited to get them anywhere near what other people's are, and they're still not in line with other growing counties. But I do get that you can only increase it so much. So it's not fair.
But Montgomery County has the economy of scale because they're building at a much greater rate than we are. So they're getting many more fees because they are building, 10% greater rate than we are.
Yeah, but
So they're getting that inflow because they're allowing the construction.
yes, and they're talking about having their APFO be less restrictive and bring that in. When your infrastructure is not in a state of needing extensive expansion, extensive expansion, then you can have extremely profitable development. But we are in such a deficit on our infrastructure that
What infrastructure in particular are you talking about?
building schools, having road changes, having healthcare issues, having fire stations built. I mean, we need schools. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows how expensive they are. When you have all that less money put toward infrastructure for decades, and you have such an enormous need for money to build expensive infrastructure, that's when the development isn't as profitable as when you have that covered, because you're adding more people, so you're adding more need to service them, so you're adding more to the expensive need of the infrastructure. Yes, you have income taxes. Yes, you have transfer taxes. Yes, you have property taxes. And when the infrastructure is not in a heinous deficit like we're in right now, that is wildly profitable. And that's where MoCo is. They had those fees. They had that infrastructure taken care of. So their development is profitable as heck. We can't do the same things as them right now. And you're right, it is a multi-pronged situation, because when you're talking about finding money, that's a very hard thing to do.
Well, that just wasn't what I heard from water and sewer. They said we had plenty of capacity. That wasn't what I heard from EMS. They said, they're right on schedule for building all of their things. I mean, I feel like the highway safety guy also said that most of the roads are in pretty good shape. And I know Calvin Ball at a meeting 2 years ago said he just got all that COVID money and put about $10 million into roads. So, because I was there at the meeting and I heard him say it. So, I mean,
Well, you're leaving out fire and schools, but I hear you.
Deficits,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get that last one. I think if there's a concern that our infrastructure is not where it should be, I'm happy to bring those experts back from those agencies to say where we are in our spending and the quality of our infrastructure, because I'm not sure I'm
didn't hear that.
aware of any
I didn't hear that.
particular issues with our water, with our sewer, with our overall road
I'm
maintenance.
talking about the expensive school needs we have
And
and the
that's on
fire
the
stations.
county. And the
Yes.
fact that they are building several new
I get it.
stations without a lot in the pipeline,
Mhm.
with adequate staffing of our fire EMS and police force. I just want to be careful that we are saying that we have an infrastructure deficit and not quite sure where that is. I think, and I don't want to change the chair, I'm going to let you defer to.
Brent's got a hand up here, Paul's got a hand up, and I think,
Again, we're solving for X. We just discussed capacity. Most people would agree, based on my circles, that 100% capacity is 100% capacity. It can vary if you change student teacher rates and other metrics, but 100% of what we consider adequate is 100%. And I will bring up a concept. There are other counties out here that consider 95% full because they realize they need time for the contractions and expansions of the market in order to ensure no kid is at a school that is overcrowded from day one. What we're also skipping over, we're looking at taxes. What a scary subject. Everyone recoils. It's political suicide to mention it. But we're focusing on something very specific, school surcharge fees, which are directly related to mitigate the growth that is occurring. And what we're collecting, this report is so difficult to get. It's from the state, and it is just absolutely stonewall how much money we're getting and where we're spending it. You guys need to look at this to go, hey, we increased our fees. Yay, we got a lot more money. We got $16 million. Did that accurately mitigate all the children that came in from residential development over that year or prior years? The answer is no. What does $16 million get you? Gets you about half of an addition, if that.
Can you clarify who the we is? Because is it schools, is it county? Who's not spending? Who's getting the money? Who's not spending? I guess it's been we just haven't had it before.
Who's getting the money? This is a dedicated charge,
To-
so it goes
to the
directly
county
toward,
For the school system.
it goes to the county, and the county delegates it to the school system for various expenditures. And please feel free to chime in on that.
Check, read the bottom part of it. It says, I think you're looking at the pay-go.
It goes and they're now finally.
Yeah,
after-
and there, and specifically says it, is used to pay off fire service, debt service.
So
So
that
it's not,
So it's not going in some ether, it's being used to pay. off
it is
that.
being used, yes, but I don't want people to
Right.
get the impression either that this money came in, it's immediately going to a capital fund. That's not what's
Okay.
happening. Some of it is, but it's not like $16 million is here you go, school system, build X, Y, Z.
Right,
And-
okay.
And we've realized this is one-time money for one-time expenditures or impacts, and that is not appropriate for bonded items. There's advice for us to go totally pay-go with that, because you don't know what the revenue is going to be on any given year.
let's clarify that for a minute, because I've been on spending affordability for 7 years. We talk about this every year. Just so everybody understands, because it's not intuitive. You get this pot of, let's call it $10 million. You can do two things with it. You can spend it now to add a new wing to an elementary school, spend $10 million. Or you can take that $10 million and you can say, we're going to use that $10 million to issue a bond, and that's going to make payment. That's a $10 million payment. And that might, by itself, it might generate, $100 million, in a bond that you can use to build a school. But then you're locking up $10 million every year. And you better have it every year, because now you've committed to spend it every year. So you're either paying as you're going, or you're bonding something, and you're using it as a payment for a bond that you issue to meet an immediate objective. So that's where as the county and its spending affordability has dealt with the issue, but very, very cautious in saying that we can't afford to commit those annual projected revenues going forward as debt service to bonds that are issued now to build something now. We need to spend it on things we're gonna spend now. So we're not leveraging it up and then committing ourselves to that $10 million a year that may or may not come. So that's the, I just want to make sure that the
No,
committee
and that
understands.
is a beautiful explanation, and for lack of better words, one-time funding to go for debt service when you have an uncertain revenue source is a Ponzi scheme in many people's books. And it looks like they're making some effort to remediate that, but that goes beyond the point. This is a math equation. How many students are you adding to the school system? How much does it cost per seat to accommodate them? Are you capturing that in these fees and structures? Or are you hoping you gain enough revenue of some random amount to hopefully offset expenses? And I've been here my entire life. My father was here. We were just discussing how many generations? Quite a while. We haven't been able to build our way out of the problem yet. I didn't go into a school trailer when I was a kid. My children are going into school trailers. Most likely my grandchildren will be in trailers because we haven't built our way out of this. So we have to solve the mathematical problem, and that's what we're here for. Of what we need, what controls do we need, be it financial, time, utilization, or allocations, in order to make that math equation work for the benefit of all. And if we got that working, how many other areas of the budget are going to work appropriately? And I do have to comment to the other services. I know a lot of firemen. We decreased the size of our fire station last time because we didn't have enough money. There's a big kerfuffle going on right now about where to put the next station to deal with the Banneker station. That's based on money. We do have capital needs in the police, in the fire, in all capital needs where they're falling short of what they need. They're doing a great job with what they got. I appreciate that. But there's hardly an instance where you can drill down on capital spending where you don't see a shortcoming in the budget. Thank you.
I can't react to that, so I won't. Too much information, sorry. I guess in terms of information that would help us as we get further down the road, what is the deferred maintenance of the schools? How big is the nut? You know, when you say that we don't want to say that there's not infrastructure. Obviously, there's county infrastructure and there's school infrastructure. The two are intertwined somehow if money's flowing between them. So I think we need to look at both of those in terms of how much is out there. And then just one other thought, you know, if all of the variables that we've talked about thus far, time and money, look carefully at that school capacity. We've talked about 95%. On the other end, there's 120%. You know, that might sound like you're throwing a grenade in the room, but all of those variables are available to work with.
I'm going to come to you, right? But one quick thing with this term deferred maintenance is just smoothly flowing off a lot of tongues. We need to understand the difference between school capacity and deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is nothing more than the failure to include proper funds to maintain your buildings on an annual operating basis. If you ignore things for year after year after year, you get this increasing pot of deferred maintenance. In the private sector, if you're depreciating a building over, call it a 20-year period, that money that you're knocking off and you're taking a tax deduction on, you're putting into a reserve fund to maintain the building. That's the whole point. If we have a pot of deferred maintenance, and I believe we probably do, it's because we're not budgeting to maintain on an annual basis. And so our facilities are deteriorating because we haven't set the money aside that we need to maintain them. And it's not limited to the schools. Look at the jail. I mean, Jessica. Oh, there's one in Jessica. But We do, we have a lot of things. Look at, public works, stormwater management. We have all sorts of issues in public works with respect to stormwater management that's deteriorating throughout the county. That's largely because all the growth was in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and all of that's breaking down. Kind of it's coming at the end of its useful life. We have literally $100 million sitting out there, according to Public Works, that we need to deal with because we haven't maintained our stormwater management facilities in the county properly. So there are many competing uses of both capital and operating funds. And to the extent that the school system has deferred maintenance, welcome to the club. Public Works has deferred maintenance. All of public safety has deferred maintenance in its buildings. But as it comes back to this whole issue of what are we doing with the school surcharge, and now it's like $9 a square foot, I think, this year for new building permits. That money, the enabling legislation that allowed that to go forward, specifically related it to increasing school capacity, not deferred maintenance. So that $9, $10 per square foot is only for capacity. It's not for deferred maintenance. So even if we use 100% of that, it doesn't solve any of the deferred maintenance issues.
I think, Dan, you wanted to.
Yeah, Dean, I'm sorry, yeah.
And I know Antoine was waiting.
Yeah.
For clarifying.
Yeah, just to clarify the deferred maintenance, and I apologize if I misunderstood what you said, but it sounded like, with deferred maintenance, you were referencing that it is maintenance that is not completed each year. That's not how Howard County Public School System is defining deferred maintenance. So the operating budget does address the annual maintenance, the preventive maintenance that, from what I understood you were saying, that is done every single year. So the way that the deferred maintenance, and we can give you guys a number, that's also going to provide clarification, because the way that the list currently is, it's deferred maintenance and deferred projects. And a lot of people say my community has X percentage, and what they're really looking at is a deferred project, not deferred maintenance. So the way that it's defined for the Howard County Public School System is deferred maintenance is the industry defines a useful life of a component, a roof, whatever. Not maintenance wise, but if that component hits that industry defined useful life and it's not replaced, it's then on the deferred maintenance. So it's not that it's not being maintained annually, and it's not that it's not working. It's that it has hit the industry defined useful life and has not been replaced. So I just wanted to provide that clarity so that people aren't thinking that things just aren't being maintained every single year.
No, you're right. But I guess the point is just that if the money is not being set aside, if it's a 20-year useful life and you're not setting aside 5% of the value or the cost to replace it in your operating budget, then you're creating deferred maintenance because you know it's going to have to be replaced in 20 years. You're maintaining it so it lasts 20 years, but you know it's going to have to be replaced. The private sector is setting aside those funds in capital reserve to make sure that when that roof has to be replaced, the funds are there. That's what I consider to be deferred maintenance.
Understood. Just understanding also that we can't set money aside. Well, especially in the operating, when we get it, we have to expend it in that fiscal year. But
So,
I
or you don't get it the next year, is that how that is? Is that, or you don't get it the next year, is that how that is? My father worked for the federal government and he was like, we gotta spend all our money, because if we don't get it next year.
So for the operating budget, and I presume it's the same for the county, in the operating budget, you go fiscal year to fiscal year.
Mhm.
And so the money you request in an individual fiscal year, you have to expend it in that fiscal year.
Mhm.
You absolutely run into that possibility, is if I am requesting 25 million, but I only expend 20, the county's gonna look at you and go,
Not
why am I giving you 25? I'm only gonna give you 20.
Right. Okay.
But also, regardless of that, you have to expend within that fiscal year. You can't hold it
Mhm.
over.
Right.
Capital is different. Capital, because of the length of projects, can span between multiple years.
So we had several folks testify last week who talked about deferred maintenance. And are you saying there is no deferred maintenance issue in the schools?
No, there is deferred maintenance. I was just clarifying that the deferred maintenance is defined based off of the industry useful life, not that things are not being maintained.
Yeah,
Right.
basically,
Yes, there
schools are
is
still being
deferred.
painted, water fountains are still being maintained,
Right.
floors are being fixed, but your HVAC unit, that is still working, but maybe toward the end is.
Right, so it's a timing and an industry useful life. Yes, there is deferred maintenance. I'm not saying there's not deferred maintenance. There is.
But as it ties back to APFO and the school surcharge, which isn't really an APFO issue, it's a funding mechanism. The school surcharge can't be used for deferred maintenance. Correct? It can only be used to increase capacity under the enabling legislation that created that fund.
May I jump in?
Please, if you know, yeah.
There are asterisks all over the historical spending, and there have been exceptions made where they spent it on other items. With that said, the need or calculation for school surcharges to be accurate still remains. Just ideally, it's being put in the correct pot as opposed to being spread to other ones and backfilling, hopefully backfilling from others. So it's ultra critical to get the numbers on that, so it doesn't bleed down. And I do, a lot of people for dramatic effect bring up deferred maintenance. It is a real thing in the overall picture. A lot of people aren't just talking about APFO, they're talking about the overall experience. But yes, capacity is what APFO takes care of, and if that's all taken care of, perhaps we won't be bleeding profusely from other budgetary line items.
Antoine.
I got you. Sorry to disturb the flow, because I'm actually going to flow well. But is it possible, so Lisa mentioned what Montgomery County had done to adjust how they got more funds. Is it possible to hear from them, like, how did that work?
Into one of our next meetings.
Great.
So I'm gonna talk about what some of the upcoming things are that I have programming brought to you by, and then what am I missing?
Well, I'm weirdly, and it's the data brain in me is like, okay, yes, you can hear that somebody has made a change in a fee or cost here, but how long did that take before it actually became implemented change? As the other part that we're also talking here is that the time between the issue or the capacity or the access and the ability for it to be applied, that's the piece where everybody seems to be finding a squeeze. Can the time be shorter, or can the time be better understood? I'm interested in knowing, not just can we hear about those alternate funding sources or means of raising funds, but how long between the implementation of that alt funding source
I was-
and
Go ahead.
and action actually happening. Not to say that it's an APFO thing, because I think it's right before an APFO decision, but kind of like I was saying before, there's probably thresholds where we have finite. APFO is a very finite formula right now. Either it's a do or you don't. You meet this, it's it. There's likely some room for a threshold in there, and it might be, if we're hearing what other funding sources may have been, what's worked, what hasn't worked, that we have an opportunity to make a recommendation that may not necessarily fit the current definition of APFO, but might fit a better applicable definition of how APFO could work.
Jeremy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna make just one quick thing, going back to the point of what is deferred maintenance, and could school impact fees be used for? I mean, if you look at what the school plans are, there's a lot of very old buildings that need to essentially have a significant renovation and addition. That's where the school system is planning on the capital improvement plan, long-range plan to do. So it's like Oakland Mills Middle, Oakland Mills High, Dunlogan Middle, Tapsco Middle, Bryant Woods Elementary, Murray Hill Middle, and all these existing schools that are very old, reach the end of their life, and the school system wants to renovate them and add an addition. So you're adding you're adding capacity by doing those type of program projects. So I would think that those type of projects would you'd be able to use school impact fees for. But I mean, that goes to say,
At least, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like that goes to say, like, because there's so much need in the school system for these type of projects, right? by renovating and adding an addition to an existing school, you're not getting as much capacity as you would if you just built a brand new school altogether and kept existing school in its current state, but that existing school needs to be, renovated and given its age. So it's a complicated issue. You can't just say, oh, we're just going to only spend it on school capacity only when there's all these other projects that need to happen that are going to add capacity, but also we're renovating a very old building that needs to be.
Go ahead.
I'll be brief. I just wanted to clarify something with Antoine, when you were talking about Montgomery County and implementation and what they were doing with their fees. What I was talking about was their school fees were extremely higher for a very long period of time. They didn't implement that over time. They did kind of go up over time, but they started out just very high, 40s, now they're 50s, 56,000 a unit. Used to be 40 something for a while, and then it's gone up. And I think that when we hear from them, we very well may hear really great suggestions from them. But I would like to hear from counties to maybe give us some advice on solutions that they found who had low fees like us for a long time, and where did they have funding solutions, and what are they doing to spend more money on school infrastructure that might be in need more than counties who have had more of that money. Them and more in the same boat as we are.
How did they transition?
Right,
Yeah.
like maybe Boulder County or Anne Arundel or something.
I actually don't, so I'm gonna be honest,
Go
I
ahead.
don't think there is a good model for this perfect 100%. And I'm curious to know what jurisdictions are at 95%. I've never heard that they're saying that's approaching inadequacy, at least in the state of Maryland. So I'd be really interested to see.
No, I'm talking about growing counties who just had a little bit higher than us, but not as low as us, but nowhere near as high as
Yeah, I
Montgomery
think a
County.
lot of jurisdictions are struggling.
yeah.
Baltimore County, actually, just because they've had such, talk about overcrowded schools, they've had a tremendous amount for a very long time, and they are looking to actually do what Howard did before and lower in certain areas, the adequacies, and then other jurisdictions aren't changing anything. So just really, it's all over.
Yeah,
The place
okay.
kind of like is whatever fits your jurisdiction. So I don't know if there is a best case where everything is right where it should be, especially for a growing jurisdiction, which would be our main surrounding jurisdictions.
So I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things we're talking about, and it's been nice to hear the affordable housing side coming in from a parent at a child at Bryant Woods, which was just listed as the highest capacity elementary school in the county. And one thing I keep wondering about, and I'm wondering if this is a source of information we could have, is how projects, this would have been under the last APFO, can get approved, like the Twin Rivers Legacy Building that was previously a townhouse complex that definitely needed more renovation, was a nice site to add more housing options for people. How that was approved in 2019, when at that time Bryant Woods was at 450 students at a capacity of 286.
Percentage?
I don't even know how high over capacity they were at that time, because our capacity number has changed since then. It was reduced by 100 students. So we're currently at 286. It was higher in the
I
past.
thought you're saying it was over, the percentage was 286 capacity.
No, students. So
That's, they waited 4 years, I guess.
So what I'm wondering, so it was 2019, but at that time, when that project would have been approved, they would have still been really over capacity. So I'm not understanding how that project went through. And now,
Because there's a max
Four
rate.
years.
No, that was a
But
wait.
but the problem wasn't resolved at the school that would be impacted. And that is the other issue I'm seeing. How is that then addressed? The problem was not, the 4-year waiting project happened, and I'm sure fees were paid and all the things were done the way they were supposed to. However, here we are now. The school is once again facing a redistricting. The problem was not solved. And I want to understand how these projects are getting approved and what we can do to prevent a problem like this from happening again, especially in East Columbia, where we have high population density. We have a lot of There's a lot of access there for people getting to public transport. It's a good place to have more housing. More is being built on Cedar Lane, the Waverly Woods community, I believe. And now, in that case, the elementary school that will be affected has capacity. But Bryan Woods didn't have capacity at the time, as I understand it, for that project to have gone through, yet here we are. And the predictions were incorrect about how many kids were coming out of that building to go to Bryan Woods. There were 10 extra students that came than were predicted or estimated. And at a school as small and old and broken down as Bryan Woods, 10 kids is a lot of kids. So that, to me, I don't understand how that came to pass, period. And I would love some information on that. It's a question I've had through this whole process. How did that project go forward? And what can we do as a committee to address that from happening? Not to mention, if those monies were paid by the builders, where did that money go? And why did it not go to the school that was going to be directly impacted by the project?
Well, we don't pay our way out of school issues, right? So it is a time and capacity issue. So I would say there's no revenue source for that, but we can do some digging into just the time frame of the legacy. But again, that's going back because that's retroactive. We can't fix what happened there. I think you need to.
But it could be information maybe that could be useful to look at and say, okay, this was what was decided. This is the parameters that were agreed upon. This is what everyone at the time thought made sense, yet this happened to this school again. So what do we now in this year need to change to prevent that from happening again? And that's the reason I would want that information. What worked, what did not, and what can we then address so that going forward, we can prevent a problem like this happening again at a school that is consistently impacted by what's going on around it. So that, I mean, using that information to inform us now is kind of my hope.
Dan, can you shed some light on your process? When you look at your charts and you see Bryan Woods at 140%, I'm just grabbing numbers, I have no idea. And let's say that's your worst one.
Mhm.
Does that move to the top of the class, the top of your line, or are you funding other projects first, even though they're less crowded?
So to answer that question, the first thing to realize is that capacity is not the only capital need. So, and the reason I bring that up is because in the multiple different meetings or committees or whatever, unfortunately, and it's human nature, we look at the one situation we're trying to do and we say, okay, well, why isn't that? And I'll give you a perfect example. Prior to COVID, Howard County was the fastest growing county in the state. We were growing by 700 to 1,000 students a year. We focused on capacity. Couldn't take care of deferred maintenance. And so now we have deferred maintenance. We probably still would have had it, but we have a higher level of deferred maintenance. And so to say all of that is, in the feasibility study, yes, Bryan Woods is one of the first items that is indicated this needs to be looked at, this needs to be addressed. When you start to add it into the capital budget and you have deferred maintenance, you have capacity, you have older buildings, you have failing systems, you have whatever, all of those items start to build up to, okay, what's that priority that needs to happen? And in some way or another, on all different levels, there is thoughts of what project should go next and what project should not go next. So it's not as simple as just to say, well, Bryan Woods has the highest need, it's going to be the next one. This one has the highest capacity, that's going to be the next one. So it's
You done, I'm sorry. So earlier on, when you explained fiscal year and not being able to accrue capital expense, projects, you said that you're not allowed to do that per your fiscal year budget, correct?
on the operating side. So on the operating side, you have to expend the funds you receive in each fiscal year. On the capital side, You try to expend within the fiscal year, but on the capital side, you can have prior appropriations that span the life of the project.
Okay, so the deferred maintenance, such as like, let's say the roof, for instance. We talk about the lifetime, of a roof being 20 years. If we're accruing that money over 20 years, then why are we having?
But we don't. Because here's the next thing you're gonna, somebody's, Councilmember Youngman, several different years when we go and we ask, for systemic renovation modernization money. And they look at prior appropriation and they say, you've got this money, why are you asking for more? When we have all these capital needs, to ask for money that we're just gonna have sit there and accrue, the very next question is, well, why are you not addressing other needs? You're just having money sit there and sit there.
Well, that's gonna be kicking the can down the road kind of issue, right? Because if we're gonna be allocating those funds to, short-term problems that we have, neglecting the lifetime span of a roof, we're not accruing that money. So we're gonna always get to the place where we have deferred maintenance because we just don't have the money. So you guys need to push back from a budgetary standpoint to say, listen, these funds might just be sitting here, but they're sitting here for a purpose. Because if we just keep spending those monies because we're getting pushback, or well, we have, X amount of money on hand, we need to spend that money first before come asking for more money, then we're gonna have the kick in the can down the road problem. So that come 20 years, we won't have the money to fix the roof, and then we have deferred maintenance.
Absolutely, and you can look at it just looking at two different systems. If you have both a roof and an HVAC system, that typically lasts around 20-25 years. And if we go down the path that you're talking about, in an ideal world where there's enough revenue, you've got 81 facilities that you're going every single year. Now, they're not gonna all happen at the same time, but every single year, you're banking money. And when the county says expect $50 to $54 million, if you're now banking money for 81 facilities for 2 systems every single year out of that 54, now you're not addressing other capital needs. So you're still taking that deferred maintenance and it's still growing. Because just you're banking money to try and address this, but you're not addressing this. And I get it, in an ideal world, absolutely. You should try, okay, we're gonna bank this in the private sector when you can do that and you can start to bank that money, that makes sense.
But do you see where that's problematic?
Absolutely.
So
I absolutely do, and
all of us sit here and on APFO, we discuss, we have all these conversations. And I think, we try to come up with solutions to quell the problems we have now. But we need to put in place, processes that will prevent us from getting back here with the Band-Aid solutions, such as the temporary setups we have with the trailers and all that kind of stuff. If we don't plan properly, we're always gonna have an issue that's going to seem too massive for us to fix because we have a problem, a planning problem, right? Where we just not, accruing the money for capital expenditure on big major projects. And then also there's the same business that, sales or revenue fix every problem. If you have sales, you have revenue, there's no problem you can have in your business that you won't be able to fix because money will be that tool that you will use to address the issues in your business. I think, we talk about, well, we can't really, add any more projects, we can't build anymore. But at the same time, we're short-sighted ourselves on increasing our revenue. So, I don't understand that, I'm a common sense type of person, right? I don't try to make complicated solutions for every problem. I think just listening, I think that we have a revenue problem for one, because, everything should be proportionate. If we're having, growth in, well, we have a lot of students coming in and we're having overcrowded schools, then we should also see a spike in revenue. And that revenue source should be then able or afford us, to expand those schools, and add the resources that's necessary to meet the demand.
we cannot say we have the demand, but we don't have the resources. It's either we're not charging enough or the funds are not being allocated properly. But we cannot have a case of saying we're overcrowded and we don't have the money, because then it would just simply mean that we're not charging enough taxes to meet the need of the public facilities that are required, or we're charging enough money, but the money is just not being properly allocated.
Agreed. I think we're certainly back around to prior conversations that were had of how do we get that revenue in? Unfortunately, the school system is not a revenue generator. So we have to work within whatever is provided to us. We would love $100 million or $150 million a year. Unfortunately, that's not realistic. So, and we're also in the situation we currently are. I agree with you. I think a lot of people agree with you that strategically planning and having it all planned out is the way that we do want to go and the way that we do want to get there. Realistically, with 78 facilities, $50 to $54 million each year is not going to get us there. So we can plan the best we can plan. Well, the best plan is wonderful till the first punch is thrown.
One thing though that we may see kind of evolutionarily happening is in HOCO by design and what's happening practically speaking over the last 3 or 4 years, as Jeff pointed out, is that the new housing that's coming in is a much lower generator of students than the housing stock that's already here. So given that public education is like 60% round numbers of the county budget, if our growth per unit of those last 20,000 units in terms of student generating growth is lower, then we may start to generate more revenue than we're spending per unit because we're not generating as many new students in those units because they're smaller units. So we're not seeing, single family houses with 3 kids scattered across the 3 levels of schooling. We may only see, like we're seeing now, 0.3 students per unit being added, not 0.6 or 0.7 from historical experience with new single family. So there may be a little hope on the horizon that's going to happen just from evolution of housing type and the new housing types that are being added and being anticipated in HOCO by design. But that's nothing but a guess, right?
I don't disagree with you at all. You have very valid points there. I'm just adding to the equation. School surcharge fees right now are per square foot. It's a form of progressive tax. Small people pay less, big houses pay more. Whether or not you like it, whatever, that's the way it is currently. And because of which, if we bring on a lot more smaller units, they are going to be smaller one-time revenues, as much as smaller reoccurring revenues. The question is the traffic bringing in there offsetting the growth at the moment? No. And I'm going to go around to a higher level thing. The Supreme Court in the 60s came up with a law which allowed APFO to exist across the country. They also came up with a law called dealing with a rational nexus, which basically means you have to have, you can't overcharge. If your impact is $10 to the school system, you cannot charge a developer $11. So we haven't crossed that magic threshold yet, because if we did, we would be in court for that. However, we're somewhere below that magic threshold right now. So that means at best, we can stop the bleed. And this APFO only deals with the capacity side. It doesn't deal with the day-to-day operations of the county in other regards. That's what your property tax and income tax are dealing with. But another thing we need to be aware of, that cap on how much we can ask for is exemptions. Turf Valley, because of the era that it was initiated, is completely exempt and causes a black hole when it comes to projections of capacity and redistricting and things of that nature. we're very kind and included inclusive housing in our exemptions for housing unit allocations in the last committee. We have exemptions right now if things are a pilot project in affordable housing. You can go through regardless of the levels of overcrowding and so on and so forth. All of those items that we exempt from our mitigation strategy or our math or our formula to resolve for X come at an expense. And without an offsetting component, if we can do an offsetting component, because that's a Supreme Court thing, maybe we could break even. But right now, we have so many exemptions within our rules that we're not able to solve for X. We need to either create an offset or we need to look seriously at the exemptions and see how they're benefiting us. And I will wrap up with, if anyone's watched the county council for the last 5 or 6 years since the last APFO was passed, there have been one-time efforts to try to fix some of the loopholes that have been in the process. Most of those have been stricken down, which is why we're still hamstringed and discussing what can we do now. And now's the ideal time to consider both what we got coming in, revenues, and also expenses in the form of offsets that we're having to accommodate.
And Brent, I'm glad you said about the exemption, because I believe that apartment complex was built and was given an exemption and might have been the reason it went through, according to a very brief conversation I had with Deb Jung about trying to get that information from her. So again, like that exception, should that have been in place? And I think that's a question we need to ask. And I think that would be a good thing to look at what was previously there and what do we now need to do to address these things to prevent that sort of outcome.
Are exemptions that have been granted even within the purview to question at this point?
Going
Well, I mean,
forward.
does it negate the project? I mean, the project's been done. So you can always go back and look at what exemptions have been given. And do those exemptions change? Do you want more? Do you want less? What would those be for? What would your measures be? And the projects are done, so it doesn't matter if you take that exemption like this for that project because it's already done.
But
guess
I
was
do
looking
think.
forward to question the exemption on the next project.
You can't cover that in that, like MIHUs and all that stuff. Yeah, it can all be covered in that.
Low-income housing tax credits.
Mhm.
That's my only fear, Antoine, with what you brought up, that we have to be very cautious of. If we're not talking about a dimmer switch rather than an off and on switch, does every project become a negotiation?
Yeah.
And then every individual project becomes political.
It may, it may, but there are thresholds. And there were probably, and I'm speaking of us as, we would say there are thresholds. Yes, we understand you have to engage in X test or to get X exemption. These are the levers that are being looked for. This is the threshold, to meet that. If it falls within that threshold, here's your formula. If it doesn't fall in that threshold for whatever the reason or under these conditions, your formula adjusts to this. There's probably room to do that so that it's not as political, but to your point, that creates room for loopholes. It needs to be, as Xavier said, it needs to be a simple, it needs to be as simple as a push button, but this doesn't seem to be push button. This seems to actually be, here's a dial for addressing capacity. Some capacity needs to be addressed at the speed of a capital project, which needs time. Some of it is a mitigation for infra or capacity need, which probably needs a faster swing to it.
Yeah, and if you're looking at like a project that was referenced in our public hearing, the Juniper, right? Which is generating 0.05 students per unit. And it's also charging $3,300 a month or something for units. So in terms of profitability for the county, it's off the charts.
Yeah.
You want as many of those as you can get, right? Just because it will help allay the situation where we're bringing in additional development that's not generating as much money as it's consuming once the new residents have come in.
Yeah.
And it seems like, from what I'm hearing from everyone, is that seems to be where we are now.
Well, that's a,
Historically, we've done that and it's accumulated, and now we have deferred issues.
well, we have, but that one had a context of density, where maybe some areas don't have the same context, so to the folks that question, does APFO apply the same way if I don't have the same density as this area of Columbia? Or is there really a dimmer switch? It's a math problem. I've been helping my niece with 7th grade algebra. So there is 100% a variable that can be tweaked. The question.
She'll probably get it. None of us will.
No. But the question is what on which side of the equation are we tweaking? Because to everyone's point here, it's a revenue. It's a revenue issue. If we had the revenue, we wouldn't have the question of does APFO apply? We'd have the question of can APFO shorten? So how do we get to the revenue? Well, we may have to think about the formula differently. So say
Lisa.
So can I just want to give you a little time check. So it's 7:32. We do have until 8:30. We have a couple more items to get through. So just giving you that as a basis.
I'll be brief. When I suggested, the time differential compromises, and you're talking about that you could create a measurement so that it wouldn't be a subjective decision that's made on those. But another area of compromise does deal with exemptions. I think we all agree that we want to prioritize getting some direct affordable housing projects spread across the county. And a lot of times when you see opposition to that, it's because they're all going in the same place, so to speak, right? And of course, you need them, they're there wherever, that's a plus. But people think it's a bigger plus to have them where they're needed and where they're not already, right? And maybe there's an exemption scale that can also be made with regard to whether it is an area that doesn't have these that really needs them. And incentivizing development where there's higher priced market rates. So it's more expensive to do those lower income projects, lower rental projects, right? Lower price project. And the exemptions don't have to be all or nothing either. I'm just saying, I think we should look at a lot of the things that are in APFO and talk about how do we make a scale within these things? Is it possible? And I think that if we look at that and if we like that we incentivize something a certain way for a project to go where we want it and where we need it. If that has to do with a capacity issue or an existence issue of affordable, either way, like we should talk about whether there are measurements that will be objective that we can consider. Thanks.
One thing, Linda, what I'd like to add to the list here is, when you start talking about the moderate income housing projects and low income housing tax credit projects, they're dependent upon tax credits that are issued by the state, by the Department of Housing and Community Development. They're extraordinarily competitive. You'll submit an application, you'll get denied the first year, you'll get 77 points and the threshold is 82. And then you have to hold the property for another year. And maybe you get 81 points the next year and the cutoff is 83. And it might be the third year that you finally get your tax credits from Housing and Community Development. Then what? Is it at that point now you have a project that you go to the county with and you're applying for APFO? So now I'm already 3 years in, I've been holding this land for 3 years, or I have an agreement usually with the seller for 3 years, and I'm holding it. And now I'm going in for APFO, and I may then find out that it's going into schools that are closed because of overcrowding. And now I've got another 4-year wait, and then I've got another 3-year construction. I mean, the obstacles are enormous for affordable housing.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting
No,
to eliminate exemptions. I was talking about how can we make incentives to place them where we don't have.
And I don't know the answer. I guess my point is just to put some context in what that process is like.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's not just APFO,
Yeah.
it's a lot of other stuff that happens before you even get to APFO. That slow things down, that make it very, very difficult. And it's overtly political.
Yeah.
Chairperson, I suggest we move on with
Move
the
on.
agenda.
Yeah, this is really good conversation. I wondered you all have an organic conversation based on what you've heard, the comments that are there. We can come back and continue to address these school comments, or if there's anything in all of the 121 pages that you see that is striking to you that you want to have a discussion on at a future meeting. So we still have a little more learning to do, and I think there's been some discussions about what some of those things are. So here's what I have planned for you all for now. The last 2 meetings of the year. So we have 2 more meetings for 2024. The next meeting is next week, November 20th, and that's because Thanksgiving's the following week, so we didn't want to have a meeting the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. That's a very sacred night for a lot of people. You know, kids are coming home from school. It's the next day you have off work. No one's to be here. I surely don't. No offense. And then
Second that.
the week after that is December 11th, and that will be our last meeting for this year. So because of that, I wanted to kind of throw out for you what I have planned. So the next meeting, we have what other jurisdictions are doing, and we're going to get a presentation from Montgomery County because they're more different than what other jurisdictions are doing. Most jurisdictions have some type of advocacy percentage. We are the only jurisdiction that I know in the state of Maryland that has allocations in addition to. So you have 2 things to piece. You have the allocation chart, which kind of does it by geography, and you meet your adequacies. We're the only jurisdiction that does it that way. Montgomery County is a totally different model, and it's kind of almost like that pay to play kind of model for new development. So we'll hear from them. They also do their APFO very frequently. I think every 3 years they revisit their APFO. So it's constantly changing, which can be good and bad. It's good because you can always adjust to what's happening in your community. Could be bad for predictability because, you know, one time you go in and do something for a project and you have this set formula, and then the next time, whoa, things have dramatically changed. So, you know, those are considerations, right? So those are some things for you all to consider. Do you want to make that as a recommendation? Again, you're only the recommending body. It'll be the county council that makes the ultimate decision on all of this. You're just one piece of this puzzle, a very important big piece. We'll be getting recommendations from the Affordable Housing Task Force. What that task force is a task force that was stood up specifically to help inform you all about affordable housing needs in Howard County with very tight parameters as laid out by the general plan for what they should be looking at from a very technical perspective. They will be presenting to you at the next meeting as well. So expect to hear from them about what some of their recommendations are for your consideration as we move forward. Then state rated capacity and state school funding. So the Interagency Committee on Schools, they are going to be coming here with Maryland Department of Planning at the December meeting to talk to you all about how the state helps to fund local school projects, where they fund them, how they fund them, what percentage you get, and what they look at in the school planning process. And then excise taxes and impact fees. So I'm going to have our Director of Finance and talk to you all about what we can do within our means within Howard County. Some things, I think even Todd alluded to this, we would need enabling legislation from the state. So is that really going to happen? I think, you know, the impact thing, we don't do impact fees in Howard County. And that goes to a little bit of what Brett was saying about that rational nexus. So when you have an impact fee, you levy that fee and it has to go to something that is directly related to the impact on which you're trying to alleviate from that development being built. And so how do we do that? We have to go for a very specific purpose. And that's where we tend to do excise taxes, more or less, here in Howard County. So kind of talking about those fees and how they're levied in Howard County, what we would need to do if we wanted to add anything else. And so he'll be here at that meeting. Some other questions that were thrown out via emails to me was looking at builder fees across Maryland jurisdictions, I guess, to see where we stand in relation to what other jurisdictions are charging. And then APFO wait times and things that are measured across other jurisdictions. So our APFO test isn't the wait time, but that's just part of it. Like we'll only make you wait so long until something has to happen. Other jurisdictions, when I was working in Carroll County, we had some schools that were inadequate. There wasn't a wait time, but at some point you as the developer could go forward to the county council or county commissioners and say, hey, look, I've been sitting here for 4 years. Schools aren't being redistricted. Nothing's being done to alleviate it. I need you to open the school up. And so they had some discretion to do things like that. We don't do the same things here, but those are just some of the differences with wait times. So looking at Anne Arundel County with Baltimore, Frederick, Prince George's, and Montgomery County were suggested as our comparable jurisdictions. So I'll get that information for you as well. I'm going to be bringing back to you from our conversations tonight the list of exemptions that we do have in our office. So who doesn't need to follow the school adequacy test? I think everyone pretty much follows roads. That's one of those ones, but the schools, for affordable housing, for senior housing, who doesn't have to meet the school adequacy thresholds? And then I'm going to bring to you all we have it, you've had it, but maybe more distilled. What were the past APFO recommendations from the past committee? Did you all want to look at those again and readdress them? Were there any changes to those, and how were they implemented in the overall bill that was a plan that was sent to the county council? So what else? What am I missing? What are we?
Can I just ask that you get it to us much sooner in the week so we can have a couple of days to look at it? Okay.
And
I know you're busy. I know.
No, just important to be honest, we have not been short. Stop was a very
Yeah.
short turnaround between our
It
meeting
was.
and this.
And you had a lot of data to
And then,
combine.
of course, there's a lot of data, and
Yeah, all of it.
the county was closed, and I was off on vacation. I
Oh,
took one day,
good for you.
took a day off.
Good for you.
So not ideal, but
Yeah.
given these quick 1 week turnarounds, it's really hard to get it that quickly. So it's not ideal. We'll do our best to try to get things to you
Thank you.
much more quickly. I appreciate that. Yeah. So bear with me for a little bit. So Lisa will be back tomorrow, so that'll be a huge help. And thanks to Jeff. Jeff doesn't work in the director's office. He's in our community planning division, and he happens to know the technology. So I volunteered him. He needs to be there.
So does this list that you've just gone through, which sounds very helpful, can we end up with sort of a list of what are the variables that we have to play with? I mean, combining, it's all an equation to solve for X and a dial. Do we know what all the variables are, or is that our challenge to
Yes,
figure
we
out
do.
what the variables are?
There's 3 tests that we have to make recommendations on: the allocation chart, the percentage adequacy for schools, and maybe the definition of what adequacy is. I mean, going back to what Brian had said, some schools say adequacy is at 95%. They are approaching inadequate after 95%. I don't want to say 100% is the right or wrong number. I think that's for part of what this body is, but every percentage we lower it, it's going to obviously change the ability for development to occur without additional changes within the schools. I would say, I know several years ago too, one of the capacity changes that happened had nothing to do with even development in general. It was how the Maryland Board of Education changed what classrooms were deemed as for butts and seats, essentially. So I had schools and this is again my prior life in Carroll County, that became inadequate and actually had less children in the school, but less classrooms that had to go to specials and things like that. So therefore that numerator denominator changed and the school became inadequate and closed. So there's, what are those adequacy thresholds? What are we going to be measuring them by? What do you feel is a recommendation for what should be open, what should be closed to new students?
I mean, if I'm reading the statute right, we're not just constrained to those 3 tests,
Yeah.
right? We can make recommendations on any alterations or modifications to the ordinance. correct?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, no, but those are the 3 things that we have in place right now, but we'll be
but
looking.
those are the 3.
I mean, again, going back to, you could look at fire EMS, but it has to be within the public realm. So like, I appreciate that there's concerns with the emergency department and wait times for those things, but we, the county, it's not a public service. We don't control that. We don't have public health in Howard or in the United States of America. So that's not something that we can control within APFO.
Yeah.
So it has to be in the public realm. We do latent type of adequate public facilities. We make sure that our stormwater management is appropriate. You know, we have a lot of state law on how to calculate for appropriate stormwater management. I don't think there needs to be an APFO test when we're already doing appropriate stormwater management. Forest conservation, you know, parks, libraries. I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole, but is that where we want to be making recommendations? Do we have enough enough library space? Do we have enough parks per person, per acres per person? There used to be a random threshold that DNR threw out, and that's part of program open space funding. Like I think 30 acres of parkland per 1,000 people used to be a general rule of thumb. They don't even follow that anymore. Then they changed that to be within now your proximity of where you are. So,
That'd be the whole county.
yeah. So it gets to be, yeah. Okay. And so do we want to go down those other areas as well? For public facilities?
Well, yeah, I mean, the last bullet on here, I mean, I was kind of poking around at some of the other jurisdictions. It does look like some of them have other components to their testing as well that we don't have. So,
Such as?
well, I think park space was definitely in Baltimore County's APFO. I really just was looking at Baltimore County and I was looking at a little bit of Montgomery County. So. I know if we're talking about future topics, I guess the one, and I think it's come up quite a bit tonight, is to have the school capacity and maybe readdress that issue. And I guess to me, the numbers, you know, how they're coming up with the numbers. I know we've talked a lot about generation of students out of different housing types. I don't know if there's been any analysis of particular apartment complexes where there have or have not been more or less students than are expected, because I think I live in another school area where there is an apartment complex that went in that did generate more students than the school expected.
I believe that we actually get those numbers.
We
have the Legacy Twin River. I think we know how many students were generated out of that particular complex. And so we do have some ability to do that, but it's hard. I mean, projections aren't perfect. It's not a crystal ball. We can't foretell the future, but we can use best professional knowledge to guesstimate of how many students. And it's never going to be perfect. You hope you kind of hit the mark.
Yeah, but it sounds like, I think there's been a number of projects that have come online in the last 5 years. So at least that would give, I think, some guidance. I mean, and one of the other things that, you know, again, it's kind of hitting on what we've been talking about is, you know, my daughter goes to an elementary school where it was closed. A developer waited for 4 years, then got their building permits. She's in elementary school, it's overcrowded. The entire 5th grade is in portables. Since 180 students at that school are in portables. All of GT is in portables at that school. Some art classes are in portables at that school as well. And then looking into the future on the one of the slide decks we got, that school still expects to have portables in 2033. So that's just, to me, they've had portables for 5 years. They're expecting to have portables for another 10 years. I'm kind of curious, like, how many schools are actively using portables? And how is that? You know, I know it was told that, I guess, the school shows it's overcrowded, right? So looking this year, it says it's 70 students overcrowded, but there's 180 students in portables. So I don't quite understand the disconnect there. So
I can't speak for the schools, maybe programming. So I think there's
that's
individual school decisions. And I mean, again, I don't know the whole situation on portables, what they're brought in for, and if they ever leave.
But doesn't that though affect, I think what you're saying is that could affect how if this committee governs capacity and we set it last time at 105, 110, 115, this committee could make a different decision if we thought that was appropriate on what capacity actually means, factoring in portables. So at a school where there's 180 students in portables, what does that mean about that school's capacity? Is that school actually housing the students, or are the portables housing the students? I know Bryant Woods has had them since 1983. They've had 4 portables. We can't add any more because there's no land. So how are we ranking capacity when there's that many kids in portables and they're not in the building?
So
That-
capacity is calculated based off the brick and mortar.
Brick and mortar.
It's not based off of
They don't count.
portables. So
So that's where
what,
the 70 comes from.
At least.
Well, that's what I understand, right? If the school, according to the numbers for this year, is 70
That's APFO.
students over capacity,
And not-
how is it that we have 180 students in portables, plus all GT is in portables, plus arts, some art classes are in portables? That's a lot of kids.
Okay, so, but that goes, sir, it's a loophole. It's not that it's not counted, because explain, it's counted, but it's a loophole. Does,
So why isn't the school 180 kids over capacity?
well, because that's not the way it was counted, and we can make the recommendation that
Yeah.
it should.
Well, maybe
be counted
that's maybe
as a
our
part of,
counting.
hey, school test now needs to include da, 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 or should, if it does, here's the exemptions, that's probably our space to.
If you're saying we can't.
I'm not sure, so I think there, I don't know, there's some caveats or how this works from like the school capacity tests that
Mhm.
these are their numbers. We're setting a threshold. I don't know if we dictate how that is divided, so I think that would come.
Well, can we set our definition of how capacity should be
But
calculated
it depends,
or
you gotta be careful
recommend?
what you're saying is capacity,
It's a
though,
state-
because if
it's a
you
state-
count trailers in
There's
capacity,
two numbers. How-
you'll
how do
be
you state?
less overcrowded
Well,
if you count
but
them.
they say
So,
they're not, but they
they're
say they're
not,
not,
and they're
but
not.
again, but if their statistics
And
say there's only
get the
70
question.
extra
I get
kids,
the question.
how is there
I get
180?
that
Yeah.
question, but you don't, the solution is not count portables
No,
in
it's not to
capacity,
count them,
because
but it's,
math would then,
well, how, I'm trying to get understanding, how are they
Mhm.
calculating the capacity in the building?
yeah, like
And then
why,
what's the
why is it
disconnect
less
between-
kids than,
And then that
The
leads me to
capacity.
think, how many schools
yeah.
maybe show that they're not over capacity on the chart? I'd love to know how many schools are using trailers.
so there's a
Like-
couple factors. One, with regards to APFO, one thing to remember is that the school system is a Howard County government agency, but it's not governed by Howard County.
Right.
And I bring that up because while APFO can recommend, or we can recommend as a committee to the county council, the way that capacity is defined is by the Board of Education, not by the county council or the county executive.
Well,
So,
then maybe just have to make sure that the ordinance is accurately, reacting to how the school system is defining capacity.
yes, but this is where it becomes into a different, and I'm not commenting on your daughter's school because I don't know what's going on there off the top of my head, don't even know the school. But what I can say is human nature is if there's a portable there, the school's gonna use it.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying this is the case, but capacity is based off of the brick and mortar building and then the quantity of students that are enrolled. If there are 5 portables, 6 portables, 10 portables, the principal is in charge of that facility and dictating or creating the schedule of how it's used. So that principal may choose, I'm putting these classes out there, whether it's needed or not.
Okay.
It may be a situation where they have no other choice, and yes, they have to be out there. But just because, for instance, Fulton Elementary School has a 9 classroom portable, it doesn't need a 9 classroom portable because it's out there, the school's using it. And it would be hard to argue, don't use it because it's there.
I think the problem with that, and I'm struggling with my daughter, is that she hates it, right? Like, it's now a struggle this year to get her to go to school because she hates going in and out of the building constantly, the portables. And so you think of a kind of a quality of life, right? That's not something, you really want your child to be going through. And I know it sounds like lots of people in the county have that issue. And I obviously realize that it's not going to make any difference for her and her life while she's in Howard County Public Schools. But I think the important thing here is thinking for the next generation of kids that maybe they don't have to go through that. And again, it's, we saw the whole thing play out where across the street, the developer, put in their plans, was, throttled for the 4 years because they failed APFO. And then finally, obviously they waited their 4 years and they started building. And so you have a school, they even redistricted a couple hundred kids out, the last big redistricting. So even with redistricting hundreds of kids out, we still have, an overcapacity issue. But that's kind of some of the things I was kind of curious about, like, how does that work? And maybe now that makes a little bit more sense that if the portables are there, they might just use them even
I
though,
think that, yeah, that's. school by school issue.
By the way, we do focus on that a lot. There's APFO counts, APFO charts, which we're all here for. That's one level of capacity and utilization. You look in the feasibility study once a year, they go, what's the utilization with portables? Just counting portables is not meeting the goal that I think you're trying to achieve. What we need to do is have potentially different mitigation when there's excessive use of portables. And by not, if we were to count inadequate facilities as adequate, that would exacerbate the problem. We can talk about that and I can show you examples. But there is one item that's new this cycle that wasn't around, pre-K. Pre-K is regional. I get it's not localized, but there are some metrics that we're doing that are countywide. There's some metrics that we're doing that are unique to the neighborhood. But pre-K capacity is a capital need that's coming online. It's weird because it's regional and it's weird because there's a private component to it too. So we don't know necessarily where they're going to pop up. And lastly, you're going to love me for this one. Anything that is a major category in capital budget is potential for review for an APFO committee. A standard of adequacy and whether it's impacted by growth.
I need you to elaborate because I don't understand what you're saying.
School system, bridges, community college, fire, library, police, recreation and parks, road construction, sewer, sidewalks, storm damage, traffic improvements, and water. Those are all major categories in the capital budget, which may or may not be affected by growth.
We talked about those. I mean, we did, not bridges specifically, but the roads component. We talked about water and sewer
There's a few
issues.
missing.
Which ones do you think are specifically missing?
All right, I'll go down the details. Justice, or PPP out and around the corner there. Senior centers, schools,
What's PPA?
Police.
Oh, police. Okay.
public-private partnerships.
It's talking about the court.
Courthouse.
yeah.
Senior centers, the Joe and Jessup. Nice IHOP right by there, by the way. Pools, services, public programs, including housing and energy management, solid waste, and maintenance facilities. All capital items that.
Define maintenance facilities. We
Fleet,
did talk about solid waste management. We talked about stormwater management. We talked about roads. We talked about police.
Cooksville needs to expand for additional services. Let's say we go with an all-electric fleet with our new charging stations everywhere. Those are capital expenses. They're directly connected to growth.
Yeah, those have state hooks. That APFO would be, yeah, I like that list.
Transit. I'm sure you're very interested.
And that's part of.
Well, all of it.
About that via the
Yeah.
blue track, when David Cookson and Cameron talked a little bit about.
Yeah.
The complete streets component and things like that.
There are things that broker the county's ability to make decisions to, things that the county can't make decisions to without considerable state help, influence. Bridges is actually a really good one that you just brought up. Can't really do anything actually without going through the feds for most of the bridges in the county because they usually exist on a state road, which is really kind of fun. And that allocation and those arguments are great. You're not wrong, but man, you just made it complicated.
That's what I'm here for.
That's all the variables. It's only seventh grade math. We're still at seventh grade math. So
I honestly, just for humorous aside, some of that math I talked to you about, I go around to schools and actually have young students calculate school surcharge fees that benefit them directly. And they are able to calculate it to about 3 decimal points.
yeah, I mean, yeah, no,
Do it as.
calculating it.
I think that maybe one of the discussion points for this committee is, do you want to look at addressing those things?
There's almost no way not to consider. I don't want to say address, consider those things as we were talking about the exemptions. We can only go but so far. You know, we can't say, hey, school A can't be made bigger because now it's against this state road. And well, APFO is gonna keep us from building on this for XYZ time because there may be a state capital project that's already in flight for that. So that's part of the juggle, for a lot of us. So yeah, let's consider all the things. I mean, it's just crap.
Well, then, would you mind sending me your list? And is that the list we want to go by?
Absolutely, not to be snarky, but quite honestly, capital budget.
Yeah.
items.
Yeah.
What we gotta do is go
Yeah.
in current capital.
Yeah, you go through the outline of the capital.
And you have an outline. So it's in the Brent list. It's,
Appreciate that. Brett.
That's
I'm
a
going to
statute
the
that
chair on
doesn't
this.
need to be
How do
considered
you
in
want to
the-
handle something like that for consideration? So now I feel like we're getting into bigger topic items that, should this be a vote now? To look at things beyond what we already have considered in that though.
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know yet.
okay. Okay, so we can,
I mean, I don't think we're, it has to be a vote item. It's not like I'm gonna say no.
okay, that's what I mean. So that's what I would say. So prior to, so maybe my suggestion would be taking this list,
But-
looking at and seeing how we handle it now, which we've talked, I guess, about how we handle adequacies in those areas.
My fear is that we're rapidly going down the road of making APFO the governing force for all of the capital budget within Howard County. And I don't know how you test for APFO for those types of things.
Well, it becomes a regulatory force on this too.
Yeah, and it ties the hands of our elected officials from being able to make value judgments on, when they decide finally that we're gonna have a capital budget a bonded capital budget of $80 million this year. That's just a big number, $80 million. Then the question is how do you fill all that in? And now if we're saying that APFO is gonna be the guiding force for how that all gets filled in because of the list of things. I just think my fear is that we just tie ourselves up in knots. And ultimately, remember, all of this is assuming that the county council and the county executive has decided that we want to pursue HOCO by design. That is our guiding document. If we make this so complicated and so constricting, not just for public officials, but also for the development community that's ultimately going to be providing the capital to get to the county's objectives, then we might as well just pull up the drawbridge and the 121,000 units we have in the county, we're done. Because when you look at what's happened and what Jeff Brown has provided information on over the last 6-7 years, where, we were projecting growth of 1,800 units per year. We're getting half that. And the question is why? And if we don't think a little bit about the why and what's caused that, it's not that the demand for housing has gone down, but it's gotten way more complicated and way more expensive and way more unpredictable. So is that what's doing it? And then if we make APFO that much more time consuming, that much more unpredictable, does the real estate development community just say, I'm out? It's too hard. There aren't enough large parcels to make it worthwhile anymore anyway. I can't even find a parcel where I can do a 70 unit project, an 80 unit project.
Yeah, I think those days are over.
Those days are over. So if I'm only
Especially
looking at,
Greenfield.
now if I'm looking at only 20, 30, 40 unit projects, and I've got all this unpredictability and all this time delay, do it,
somewhere else.
Okay, before we kind of go off there, maybe a good balance to address this question is to look at what other growing counties have in their APFO. Because that was part of what we wanted to do anyway.
No, I agree.
Look at what the other growing counties have in their APFO and say, okay, this is something that they've considered, that they've added, that we don't have. Maybe we talk about those.
And the thing that I would say is, we're just making recommendations. We could send it to the council and they could poo-poo all of it. So I think you have to make it
Yeah.
palatable.
Yeah.
You know,
And-
we can't just say, we are the authority, we're gonna tell people what to do. We made the right choice, we knew the numbers. Because then the council's gonna look at that and go, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. So glad you spent 9 months doing that. See you later, have a nice life. You know, so it's gotta be a workable solution that can be swallowed, you know?
And as much as we can come to consensus on that, you know, we understand schools are really important, and so is housing. How do we make the marriage work?
Exactly.
Essentially, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what our goal and objective. It seems like the group is all on a consensus about that's the goal and objective.
And I appreciate your input, and my viewpoint is this is setting our standards of adequacy. I think our elected officials will get to choose to vote whether or not they can proceed with it or not. And Prince George's, St. Rose, Montgomery, all the neighboring counties all have some components of that just described. Maybe not swimming.
But I will tell you, Prince George's County is the fastest growing county right now. And Montgomery County is not far behind them. And I sent a chart.
Yeah.
You guys wanted to see it. I sent it to her. But if you look at the Mid-Atlantic region and you look at Howard County in the middle as far as growth, all the other counties are like blue, red, whatever. And there's Howard County right in the middle of gray.
Well, that's encouraging, because PG has fire and police.
So, but those counties are growing, they're bringing people in, they're bringing tax base in, they're bringing, yeah. they do.
To you, but that's also to Todd's.
They're-
There's something qualitative to growth that we're probably all haven't yet heard. That what's causing growth to happen, why does growth happen the way it does, and are we pulling on that thread as well? You know, we've already pulled on Howard County has the best schools in the state. You know, but compared to other counties, and my brain's going, other counties in the world, other counties in the country, what else is Howard County also doing? Does it also have, is it the walkability of Columbia, the accessible transportation? Is it the wetlands that, you know, think, you know, what's those other pieces that causes Howard County to still be an applicable place of growth? I think of Howard County as a very big Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Because I spent way too much time in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and
You don't have any Amish here, I don't think.
yeah, no Amish here. You know, they're very similar. So when I heard Lancaster, you know, years ago, Lancaster is becoming a place for 45 and older, I said, Howard County's probably going to show up on this list really soon, and it was within a few years. Well, what are those signals that make those kind of things happen, and does that become something that we say, hey, when we're looking at APFO, what do we want to consider? What should we be considering? Should an exemption for, choose words carefully, should an exemption for aged housing work this way? Should an exemption for affordability housing work the same way? Or are there levers, you know, to that? And if so, we might be able to figure out the revenue piece. I like 100 million, that's a really great number. You know, we might be able to figure that out, but in a way that's allows us to meet the first definition of deferred that we all heard was, hey, you took too long to get it built, which is what we're all trying to avoid. We don't want to have school, hospital, road infrastructure that falls behind the ability for the county to support.
So,
I'm sorry, just going to say really quickly, going back to Prince George's and Montgomery County, they have actually different funding structures too for a lot of things, because they have NNCPPC, so they have their own like taxing structure just for some of those amenity type.
one thing, I know we're close to closing out. I think we're all ready to. It's been pretty dense tonight, but the chart that Jeff Brownell presented that talked about the HCPS has projected growth versus now our actual growth. We're like 7,000 or 7,500 students right now under what the projections were for right now. We have 20,000 additional units we can build in the county, housing units in the county. If we follow the ratios that we're talking about, the historical ratios, that's 10,000 more students. And then we're built out, unless we rezone and we increase the density in our rezoning. we had projected we'd have 67,000 students right now, or 66,000 students right now. We have 58 or 59. If we build out those 20,000 units, we're talking about an extra 10, and it probably won't be 10 because we won't be getting 1/2 student per unit going forward, because we're going to be building smaller units going forward, which has been our experience the last 4 or 5 years. So my point, I guess, is that when we're talking about adequacy and adequate public facilities, we're talking about a very small delta off the projections that HCPSS was using just 5 years ago for where we are now. But we're looking at it for 20 years from now before we get that extra 10,000, which I don't think will be 10 based on what we're seeing in our growth. So I want to be cautious in overdoing it, APFO, because we need to get those 20,000 units built. We're short housing. We know we're short housing. We're short affordable housing more than anything, but we're short housing across the board. And if we complicate APFO so much, we won't get there. We can't. Go ahead.
Just with regard to the school part of that conversation, APFO, we're supposed to determine almost like a speed limit for a road. Like, we're supposed to say, what do we believe is an appropriate capacity over which we need to halt projects? And like, we pick those percentages, we determine what that measurement should be for a variety of reasons. When I hear about school enrollment projections and trends, those are very important pieces of information for lots of reasons. But I don't see why, if nobody's speeding on this road, we should lower the speed limit. No, the speed limit you pick and you apply it, and whether somebody is speeding on it or not is just, that's just what happened that week. It's sort of like, to me, you figure out for different reasons what the overcapacity amount should be. If it ends up not getting hit because school enrollment's down, then okay, it's not hit. Doesn't mean you lower it.
That might be the deliberation process now. And I'm Monday morning quarterbacking this great.
Okay.
The way that we thought about growth before the pandemic is not the way that we can think about growth now.
I agree.
And so we can look backwards and say that we made determinations based on what we saw and what was possible. But truth-ish be told, every city, every municipality, every locality borrowed from 2022 and 2023 to fix what was happening in 2020 and 2021. And that ripple is the decision process that we're dealing with here. And that ripple also became living choices, purchase choices, development choices. And so we have a slightly different, the dice are the same, it's the same things on the die, but the die is weighted a little bit differently. And we just have a more fun cultural problem.
Mr. Chairman, can I say we go to that last slide?
Yes, please.
We still have to go to the last.
Somebody keep us on task.
Go.
Right.
So
Thank you.
tentatively thinking of 25.
Okay.
Are Wednesdays still good? This time slot every 2 weeks, like how does that shake out for everyone?
Fine.
Okay. Now, I have not planned beyond April 17th. And I'm
So
not
can I
saying-
just tell you, the 3rd and the 17th are a Thursday, not a
Oh, goodness.
Wednesday. So you should say.
You know what,
April
I was looking at the 24 calendar, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I was putting it in my calendar and I was like, no, wait a minute, the 3rd and the 17th are Thursday.
Yep, so the 2nd and the 16th.
Yeah, so the 2nd and the 16th.
Okay, so 2nd and then, I'm gonna change that right now because I'll go crazy if I don't. Thank you. So the 2nd and the 16th, I try to avoid holidays in our approved time, our holiday approved schedule for Howard County. So January 8th, 22nd, 5th, 19th, 12th, 26th. I'm not saying the public hearings on the 16th. I think we get through February and see if we're on target to have something for a recommendation. Maybe it's in May. I'm just putting it down as a goal to try to achieve. But that gives us, 6 meetings to develop recommendations after the first of the year.
And is that what we're gonna be doing at the next public meeting, giving recommendations?
The next public hearing will be based on here are recommendations
Okay,
to council. And then you would hear that public hearing, obviously, just as we did, you would get testimony. And then you would say, okay, well, are there other things we want to consider? What do we think of that testimony? Does that sway your decision-making process in either direction?
But we publish our recommendations
Okay,
prior
so
to the
we
public.
must.
hearing.
Yeah.
So
How soon?
when would you be voting on this? And
Could be.
like, you said, sorry, was it like the March 12th or 26th?
I mean,
It can't be April 2nd. That's too close.
We're going to public hearing in a second. You know, the hope is by the March 12th, you would have an idea that these are pretty firm, basic recommendations. That's what the public hearing would be. This is ambitious, I get it. So maybe it's longer than, I think we reevaluate after the first few meetings.
So are we taking a vote
Yeah.
on his recommendations
No, oh, yeah, yes, you will be.
before the public meeting?
Yes.
And then we have the public hearing?
Yes.
And then we potentially could reconsider a
Yes.
prior vote and vote
Absolutely.
again?
No, you would come back and then have the
Why not?
discussion.
No, I just want to understand the process. That seems like a fine process to
Yeah,
me.
you
I'm not
want to
questioning it. I
reconsider,
just,
based on what you've heard, you want to reconsider
Mhm.
those
Yeah.
recommendations, do you want to?
I just wanted to get an understanding, was that first vote a firm vote? And the answer is no,
Yeah.
because then we'll go back and we could vote again based on what we heard in public hearing.
Right, so
But
you're gonna be voting on, what are you putting out to the public? Then you'd be voting on, what are you sending to council?
Yeah.
At the last, APFO committee, and Brent and Lisa know this, that if there was not 100% consensus reached, then what was the dissent? And then kind of a synopsis of why it wasn't 100% consensus, so. And I think that's still good, so you can see what the counter is to that argument.
Would the dissent be also published with the
Yeah,
recommendation?
yeah, that's exactly how it was done last time. So, I would encourage you to go back and look at what was done. We provided that in meeting one. Look at what the other APFO committee did as a reference point. If you feel like you don't want to go through all that, let me know. Those were, it was a model that worked. Why,
Who drafted it all? Like,
Staff.
staff does it, okay. I wasn't sure if we were gonna be
Not
writing
the
out.
chairman.
not me either, maybe it's just, no.
things like that, but as far as like putting them down, it's like you want to take things up and put it together.
Yeah.
That'll be staff's job, which
Okay.
is me. And whoever else I volunteer in my department will be taking all of these meeting information and putting them up there. And so for instance, like pretty much that whole book that we've put together so far, that is kind of the report. That was basically what was done. A lot of the stuff may be appendicized, but the key body of the report will be a synopsis. And then all the additional data would be just in appendices. So we just have it for the record.
One thing I'll mention is when we had actual voting,
Mhm.
they actually, it was in person, but they used this big screen and literally Carl Jones there just sat and typed what we were saying and it would appear on the screen. And they were like, do I have it right? Did I get that? Is that what you said? Okay. And then
You have a
vote.
stenographer.
And then we vote. It was like in real time thing with the motions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah, technology is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and at those meetings, and I'm not sure Carl's on the line, but it won't just be me here. I think we're gonna need a few of us to keep track and make sure we get those things correct. And then we'll be more particular about following Robert's rules and stuff like that. Right now, it's just kind of the warm up to it, so.
Right, so then, I mean, just looking at your list, the list of tentative dates, there's also effectively another bullet that's tentative after public meeting.
Oh, yeah.
So whenever public meeting is, and then there's gonna be,
Oh, yeah, there might be 4 more meetings after a public hearing. And you're required to do 2, who knows, maybe you'll want to do a 3rd. That's up to you all. Or if you think you've captured and gotten the data point that you need. I mean, I wouldn't suggest going back unless you feel like there's a real need to do a 3rd meeting, but you're required to do 2.
Don't schedule your summer vacation yet.
Yeah.
We're gonna go to the first meeting and it's gonna be such a presentation.
well, it was just at the end of April there, you know what I mean? I'm thinking it's spring, the sun's finally gonna be out, that rain is gonna
We
be.
hear from people prior to, like, hey, this is what we're putting forward, and this
Yeah,
is,
we're here.
we'll hear from you, but we're not changing it. I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
wise to plan, and we know where we're going. Here's the basic, and I think probably within 6 meetings, you can get to pretty much where you want to go.
Mhm.
And then it'll be fine tuning, maybe, 4 more meetings after that.
Just I think was April 16th, one of the dates, I think it was on the,
Yeah.
just that spring break.
I was gonna ask, is there a
So-
spring, because Easter's the
I mean,
20th.
this isn't in stone, so.
I think that might be a scheduling
Yeah.
issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have
When
to
we
just
get
kind of
closer.
work through it, yeah, and see what we can do. If a few people are missing, I think that'll be up to the chair whether he wants to have that meeting. But I'll send this out by the end of the year, beginning of next year, but with more formalized dates. And then you can put them on your calendar, and if too many people say, hey, that's something, then we'll
Work around.
work around it or figure it out. We want to have as much of a full membership of, here as possible when we get to those decision-making points.
Okay. All right,
Motion to adjourn?
motion.
I'll
to
make a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
I'll go ahead in a second.
Second, third, fourth, all approved.
Yes.
Thank you.
Keep it, Brett.
Yep. I have the reason to fix my data model. I don't really. It's honestly a pain, but, a lot of it is not a pain. That they're just- So.
Right. Which-
You do.
Want to pass this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get. What if all day,